Pleased to have back in the studio with us libertarian economist and president of the Market Institute, Charles Sauer. MarketInstitute.org is his website. You can tweet him at Market Institute, or his personal Twitter handle is Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. Charles, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. So I find this very bizarre that the administration is reverse engineering all the numbers that they're going to use to justify everything from tax plans to immigration policy to trade policy based on the assumption that we're going to have 3% GDP growth when we haven't cracked 1.2% GDP growth since the 90s. This is bizarre. Is this, I mean, you're an economist. You have to be looking at this going, this is crazy.
Well, so I guess there's multiple levels of what I find interesting here. It's one, if we look at the Obama presidency and what they said they're going to pass Obamacare and people are going to save on average, what, $2,500 per family was going to be saved. And they didn't hit that mark. And it was one of the black marks, one of the problems that hit Obamacare is that they didn't hit that mark. And so when the Trump administration...
If I may interject, I think they would have hit that mark if they had had a public option, if Joe Lieberman hadn't prevented them, if this turncoat Democrat had not prevented them from having a public option, because he was the one vote they needed.
Well, we're going to completely disagree with that, because the death spiral that it's in right now is because they just purely focused on the individual market, and having the public option wouldn't have solved that. But if we look at the failures of the Obama administration, when the Trump administration redefines their goals of something that is very high, I mean, it's a great goal to have, but I don't.
That since after World War II.
I'm glad that we don't have a president that's shooting for 0.5% economic growth, right? It's good that they're trying to shoot for 3% economic growth, but it's something that he's going to be judged by for the rest of his administration. So I agree that it's bizarre. I agree that he's probably not going to hit it, but the odds are he's going to have a higher economic growth than Barack Obama, and because Barack Obama had one of the lowest economic growths of any president since, what, the 1940s. So,
well, and the reason why, of course, is because Republicans said no to absolutely everything he tried to do. And so you're operating on the assumption that just like during the Reagan administration, just like the first Bush administration, and just like the second Bush administration, that Republicans who say no, 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 when there's a Democrat in the White House to any kind of spending programs, any kind of stimulus programs, are going to, as they did for Reagan and both Bushes, say, yes, 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 we'll double the national debt, no problem. We will stimulate the economy so that you can, wear a halo in the, so we can, praise St. Ronnie who tripled our national debt.
That's not what I'm going to say. I will agree with you on the fact that Ronald Reagan spent and spent and spent, and he spent on a lot of areas that didn't make sense. It's something that could Republicans and conservatives, but Republicans and conservatives don't hold George W. Bush up on a pedestal the way that they hold Ronald Reagan up on a pedestal.
How was it any different than Reagan? He lied to the American people about what he was doing. He lied us into a couple of wars that cost us, $4-5 trillion when all was said and done.
That's exactly what I was getting ready to say, but it makes more sense, or it makes a bigger effect if it comes out of my mouth. We generally know that you were going to hate on Ronald Reagan, but the fact is that Ronald Reagan shouldn't be on this pedestal. The war on drugs, a lot of the things that he did don't make sense for economic growth in a real economy. But let's get back to the fact that, so Trump, by looking at the 3% growth, by looking at using different numbers to justify economic growth, there are some of the things that they're looking at that are good. It would have been better if President Obama would have started looking at them differently, so that now in a Trump administration, we could start with a new set of numbers. A lot of economists, there's an article going around by Eberstadt. I know his son well. I don't know him well. And David Brooks today that talk about this. But since the 2000s, we haven't had a great economy. But if we look at labor participation rates, they're really, really low, but that's not captured in our unemployment numbers. We need new economic data, and we need to look at different numbers to justify it.
I don't disagree with that. And in fact, it's a point that Bernie Sanders was making on this program for the 11 years that he was on here every week. And, that we're not accurately capturing a whole bunch of numbers, from the numbers that we use to calculate cost of living increases for Social Security to the numbers that we're using to calculate unemployment. And I don't disagree with that. But there was this you mentioned David Brooks. David Brooks has a piece in the New York Times. It was called "This Century is Broken." It's one of the top 20 most forwarded stories right now in the New York Times. And basically, he's kind of bemoaning the loss of civility and the loss of, I don't know, some fantasy Republican time when people like William F. Buckley would say, and I quote, "The white community is entitled to take such measures as are necessary to prevail politically and culturally in areas in which it does not predominate numerically." In other words, the whites should control places that are majority black. He was speaking of the South. And then he will go on to say, for the time being, it is the advanced race. I mean, this has become the part of the DNA of the Republican Party, and I think it's very
interesting way to move it off. But I mean, this is really the baby boomer war on millennials here.
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, you read Brooks's piece, and it's like all this kind of hand-wringing, and then you read the comments and read the readers' picks comments, and person after person after person is saying, this started with Reagan. This started with trickle-down economics. This started with so-called free trade. This started with union busting. All those things drive down the wealth and the income of working people and drive up the wealth and income of the top 1%. How is that good for America?
Reading the comments of somebody that's using anonymity in the comment section to not to attack David Brooks and what he did, but he was basing a lot of his article off Eberstadt's article, who is actually a good economist who's doing good work. And so, I mean, their numbers show that the actual change in the economy was the 2000s. So sure, you can insinuate that it goes back there, but that's not where the academics are.
That was the end of the dot-com bubble.
If you want to join the non global warming believers, then you can go and believe what numbers you want to. But the science and the economics changed in the 2000s.
Did you just acknowledge global warming?
Wow, that's the inverse of what I said. Was an acknowledgement of that. Where I go with the science. When the numbers point to something, global warming or climate change is happening, but the science doesn't necessarily.
2,300 warm records last month, 79 cold records last month.
The science doesn't point to the fact that it's human induced. But is there something that we should? The science doesn't show that. You just don't. We don't have a percentage. If you look at the equation as an economist, we have different variables. We happen to only talk about the variables that we have an assurance of, but we don't talk about the variables at all that we don't know.
So you think that throwing 600 billion tons of carbon into our atmosphere over roughly a 120-year period has had no effect?
Well, you're going to... the thing is that we don't know, and scientists don't know the level of effect that has.
Scientists do know.
We know
There's
that
no dispute about this.
We know that when a volcano burps, it'll put out more than all of us will in what
for a day or two.
No, it's actually a couple of years or something.
If you want to go back to the beginning of the Permian mass extinction, yeah, the Siberian traps poured out enough heat and enough gases to trigger a mass extinction. But look, that's a very different thing.
But look, when I'm talking about global warming or what we're going to do, I want to talk about the fact that we recognize that something's going on. When the left talks about it, we have something like what Governor Cuomo's doing. He talks about climate change and renewable energy. And then what does he do? He taxes people to give money to his crony friends and not do anything about it. So
his crony friends who are running
nuclear power plants,
renewable energy,
nuclear power plants, not renewable energy.
In that regard, I don't disagree with you. I'm not a fan of nuclear power.
We actually need to do something that matters.
I'm not a big fan of Mr. Cuomo either, but yeah, we do need to do something that really matters to stop carbon from being thrown into our atmosphere because it's poisoning our Earth.
You're not going to stop carbon from going into the atmosphere. Carbon is something that's been being produced
since the 1850s.
No, it's the percentage change. I don't actually. You would know the percentage change. I'm not going to run into that brick wall, but we don't know how much from other aspects, other variables.
We do.
The climate is changing.
We do. This is
There's
measurable.
actually good
we know
research
that the
on this.
Arctic was 50 degrees warmer than it should have been this last winter. 50 friggin' degrees, Charles.
No, you used some words there that shouldn't be.
Free.
The National Center for Policy Analysis has a great primer on this where they talk about the different variables that change that change the environment.
You should not be taking numbers from right-wing think tanks that are funded by fossil fuel billionaires. You should be taking numbers from actual scientists. Go to NOAA.
The scientists that they're actually grabbing numbers from there are very high-level scientists.
Well, then they're cherry-picking their data because there's an absolute scientific consensus in this country. There are no scientists, zero, who are not funded in part or in whole by fossil fuel interests who say that global warming is not a problem and is not anthropogenic, is not caused by human beings.
And the scientists that are funded by the left, lo and behold, come out with the same statements that the left wants them to come out with.
Funded by the government, funded by universities, funded by good old-fashioned scientists. They're saying this.
And yet somehow you believe in those numbers, but when we talk about the numbers in the economy, you don't want to agree with those. So we can pick and choose what numbers we want to agree with. I tend to just choose numbers.
Yeah. Okay. All right. But you choose your numbers. I'll choose. Okay. All right. Charles Sauer. You can tweet him at Charles Sauer.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
As in at Charles, Sauer. Charles, thank you.
Thank you.
It's good to have you with us. We'll be back.